The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's ePay Improving Compliance Rate Changes webinar. Apologize for the little delay. We had a little technical difficulties on my end here trying to connect up. So we are ready to roll. So rate changes is our topic for today. And once again, this is our last of the 5 metrics that we'll be focusing on initially for our sessions. Going forward, every week we still have other sessions that will be related to our compliance that'll just give you better ways to improve upon what you're currently doing. So for today's session, like I said, is rate changes. And as always, we do mute everybody, so just so that everyone knows that if you have any questions, any concerns about anything on today's call, please do ask your questions in the questions area, and your questions will be answered at the appropriate time. Now, as we go through, just to keep a refresher and reminder that these webinars still will continue on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 2 p.m. Central Time until further notice, and we expect everyone to be a part of these. So these webinars as well are being recorded and are going to be made available online as soon as the presentation is done today. I'll put them on YouTube as well as on Gateway. But all documentation will also be provided out there for your use going forward. So let's go on and get started. Our session today will be focusing on rate change. And as we go through rate change today, you will see that this is a very simple metric to be able to do excellent with. So with saying that, we're going to talk about what is a rate change. We're going to go through and talk about how to correct an invalid punch, and as well as a rate change, because there's a couple things in there that are intertwined. And I should have put a rate change in there, but we'll go to that little piece. We'll go through how you're doing as your top 10. Now, one of the things to keep in mind is the rate change being a very easy metric to maintain. We're going to be focusing on how to stay in that 4.0 range. There's no reason why anyone should not be in a 4.0 range when it comes to this particular metric. Now, kind of saying that as well, the rate changes can be best described as any manual alteration to an employee's pay rate in the Blueforce Timesheet view. So that basically means is at any point someone goes in and makes any change to the employee's pay amount, necessarily the pay rate, sorry, that is what's going to be counted against you. And we'll go into details a little bit furthermore on that, but bottom line, the pay rate comes from J.D. Edwards, and therefore there should be no rate changes being made directly in the employee's timesheet. So the rate that comes over is the rate the employee should be paid. And once again, this is the easiest metric to score 4.0 in. Now, only those that have access to this field can actually see the employee pay rate to start, and can only be the ones that make any changes to it. So whenever there's a question about rate change, or a question about who's in there making those changes, who's going in there and tweaking items in Blueforce as far as it relates to pay rates, that's going to be 2 roles. It's going to be those who have the submitter with pay rate role, or those who have the approver with pay rate role. Generally, the editor, the typical submitter, do not have access to this function. So for those on the phone call today that are editors, those that are submitters, generally you do not have access to this field unless you've had a request otherwise to give you the pay rate. Now, JDE is the system of record, and all permanent/primary pay rate changes must occur there. That basically means if someone gets a raise, anyone gets initially hired for that matter, anything dealing with pay rates, the one key pay rate that employee is due to get paid has to be in J.D. Edwards. And the best way to go about that and adjusting anything you see in the system is to go straight to your local payroll admin, there, your local offices, or you can obviously get your corporate payroll contact involved for some assistance with that information update. But bottom line, rate changes should not ever be touched over in Blueforce. Now, there are situations that we do understand that there will be, and there always is going to be those instances out there where an employee may work 2 different tasks or work 2 different job sites, or a combination of both there, and be due different pay rates. That's going to happen. We understand that. We also understand that some employees may have to work at a job site that requires a certain pay rate or maybe a differential to be paid to that employee based on a certain rate type, based on a certain task, based on a certain shift or time of day, or even a day of the week they work. Now, in all of these cases, there are temporary or conditional rates that can essentially be set up in the system. So keep that in mind. There is still a way of applying these. The only thing I am saying here on this call today is that we do not want to do those manually. If there is a rate change that needs to be done, this has to be done by the system. The system has to be part of this function. The system has to just go in there and put in these temporary or conditional rates. Now, rate changes due to a specific job task or shift premium or differential rules, like I said, can be set up in Blueforce, but the system-driven changes are what's permissible and will not reduce your compliance scores. So just keep in mind, if you go in there and have this urge to go in there and change an employee's pay rate, do not, because that is actually what's affecting our scores. Now, as we go through this, and before I start going through some examples, let's go through the top 10 scores for best rate change. Now, when I go through here, I actually scratched out 10 because actually we had 17 ISS areas that had a perfect 4.0 in this metric. That basically means that all these locations are doing perfect. They're not touching any of their rates. They're letting the system go through and calculate their time in the system correctly. So hats off to everybody on the list. You had a 4.0 in this particular category. Now, not to take away from anybody else, because we had the best showing of any metric thus far, and it's been on rate change. Of the 300 districts that we have in U.S. and Canada, 249 had a perfect 4.0 score. So that means that the majority of you on this phone call are doing excellent when it comes to rate change. Now, those other 51 locations we need to address, because those 51 locations there are actually, having some issues. So 30 of those had a score of 3.5 to 399, which is pretty close to 4.0. But this is one of the metrics that I want to make sure that everyone gets a 4.0, because there's no reason why we should be touching anybody's pay rate. Now, 91% of them are compliant. That means it's fantastic. And obviously, like I said, no reason to not have a 4.0. Now, we understand, like I said, those scenarios where employees work different jobs or tasks or stuff along those along that line that actually causes them to get different rates. I'm going to address those here next. But one of the key things to keep in mind, part of this rate change, is that you make sure that your rates, any raises, any union increases, any state increases, anything like that that's coming up down the pipe, do those sooner rather than later, because everything in the system is based on the effective date. So we can actually go right now if I wanted to. We're in February now, but I know March 1st there's a group of people that I work with, let's say, that are due a pay rate increase. Well, I can go in there and submit that information now, put an effective date as needed, obviously on that record, and then the system won't actually accept that until that particular effective date. So there's stuff you can do now to prevent that stuff, as far as pay changes, stuff like that we know that's going to be inevitable, that's going to happen. The scenarios I'm talking about here shortly, involve those scenarios where an employee may work a different job or different task, and those changes is what's causing the rate change. Now, we have a lot of union jobs around the country that this happens all the time. We have a lot of just customers that choose to pay our employees higher at some jobs versus others. So stuff like that can be set up in Blueforce to save you the time and hassle from having to, first off, listen to me tell you, not to do time changes, but secondly, to have to actually do that work. The system will do it for you. So keeping that in mind, how do you stop making those rate changes? Now, those rate changes are very simple, and there's two easy ways of setting them up in the system. First one revolves around task level rates. What a task level rate change basically does is that we actually assign rates to specific tasks in the system. What that basically means is, if everyone's familiar with the time card view now, when an employee goes to the time card, or whenever you go to review an employee's time in the time card, there is a column called task. That column really essentially drives, what the employee worked. Not necessarily the job title, but what is the function or task that they actually did during their shift on the job. So that task can actually be programmed, I guess is a good word, to actually act a certain way whenever we look at it in the timesheet view. So we can actually say, whenever an employee clocks in as a day porter, pay them an extra $1, or whenever they clock in as a day porter, pay them a flat rate of $12 an hour. Different ways of doing it. Now, from the task level perspective, we're actually telling the system what is the flat rate that task is going to earn. Now, keep in mind that these tasks are actually set up at the job level. So that basically means is that anybody working that job would then be able to punch into that task and be able to get that applicable pay rate. Now, the flip side of that is if the employee does not need to, or maybe local management, supervisor, district manager, decide they don't want the employees clocking into a task, they want the system just to punch in, punch out, and then they'll adjust the task later. You can always go back into the timesheet or time card, sorry, either one, and actually adjust that task as needed. So, for example, if I was your employee and I punched in as a custodian today, but I actually worked as a carpet tech, well, I can always go over to the time card screen, go to that particular edit time card and edit it. And when I go to edit time card, I can actually go in there and select the task of, carpet tech, whatever may be the one I'm working that day. Now, making a change to the task is not going to affect you. It's not going to hurt you as long as you do it in a timely manner. So for those that heard my discussion last week about correction lag, that would be the only thing that would be affected if you do it that change 36 hours within 36 hours of that original entry. There's not going to be no issue. But if you start waiting after that 36-hour time frame, then that's when the metric kicks in and starts counting against you for correction lag. So the task level rates, basically, just so you know, is we can go in there and set up a task rate, rate for a specific task that allows the employee to code time to that specific task and get paid by a specific rate. But as I mentioned, this affects everyone at the job level. So just keep that in mind. That is going to be something for the entire job level. Now, one thing I pointed on there is my third bullet point under task level rates is that the employee's default task for a job can also be controlled for the employee's default shift and task tab. Now, there is a tab in there, and for sake of this conversation, I'm actually going to just pause for 1 second, and I'm actually going to pull up I'm just going to go in here and pull up Blueforce. And I'm going to show you this a little bit in depth so you can actually see how this is going to possibly help some of you. So right now, I have a bunch of employees that are in the system, but I'm going to actually go in here and go ahead and just put in one of my test employees, Edward Cozina, which is my test employee that I use all the time on these webinars. There is a tab on the bottom of the record out here, and for those that are connected online, you'll see at the bottom of the screen there's a little tab here called Default Shift and Task. Now, that Default Shift and Task tab allows you to see all the jobs that the employee has access to working, but not only does it show you that, but it also shows you the default shift that employee is assigned to. And we'll go into default shift a little bit further down the road in the webinar. I'll just briefly touch on it today. But it also shows you a task that's associated to that particular employee when they work that particular job. So if I go to that default shift and task tab and then I go into see that this employee only has one job, that job is showing as my main office, then it has a default shift, and then it has a default task. So the question I always get is, how do I get a task on the time card screen if the employee is never clocking into a specific specific task when they get asked to clock into a job? Well, this is where the system pulls it from. Pulls it from this default task. Now, the way it works is the default task should be something that's that correlates to the employee's job title over in JD Edwards or JDE. Most of the time it's correct, not all the time, because sometimes it's off because the jobs were loaded into the system and the corresponding tasks don't actually line up directly with the job titles that are available in JDE. So in those cases, in those particular jobs, you might get a different offhand task assigned to an employee. But bottom line, and just kind of an offshoot to this original webinar, I just want to make sure we all understand what this can do for us, is if I actually go down here and click on Edit on the left-hand side of the job, right to the left of the job name, I have the ability to go in here now and edit this task to something else. So if he's not a custodian but is supposed to be a supervisor all the time, I can go here and change the supervisor and then come over to the far left-hand side over here, left-hand side of the line, and click on Update. And that'll actually update it in the system. The only one thing left to do is at the bottom, if I scroll down to the bottom of this page, there's a save. But you update and then you save, and the system will automatically update your task. Now, editors, submitters, and approvers have access to doing this adjustment. And I'm bringing it up today because many of you on this call have expressed concern that the tasks aren't correct in the system. Now, what I typically would urge you to first do is make sure they're correct in JD Edwards. Get with your payroll contact, make sure that they understand that the employees work at different job positions typically. Make sure it's correct in the system, and if it is corrected there, then we can come over here and make this adjustment as needed. But JDE is a system record and always will drive those changes down to Blueforce. Now, more so the reason I came down this road to actually show you this is when we talk about task level rates. If I were to say that when Edward works as a supervisor, he gets paid $15 an hour, versus when he clocks in as a custodian, he only gets $10 an hour. Well, if that was the actual scenario, and Edward's record was, let me go back to what I had it, his record was a custodian. When Edward clocks into the punches in on phone in or the Walter, and we don't have it, we have him set up to ask for tasks now. But if he doesn't put in a specific task, the system typically will go back and default to whatever is on his default shift and task tab. That being said, when an employee punches in, it actually goes back here to custodian. So in my scenario here, if he was due to be working supervisor today and he was due that $15 rate, that would actually mean that this employee, Edward, would have to either A, assign that task when he punches in, or the supervisor, or better yet, the editor or submitter, would have to actually go back to the employee's time card and make the adjustment to his time card screen to actually adjust the task accordingly. So keep that in mind. This default task is there. It's always going to be there. It's always a fallback for when the employee doesn't know what to put in at the device. Typically, the system comes back and says, "Oh, you meant to be this default task." So I'll come back to this screen here momentarily just to give you a little bit more insight on that. The other side is the shift differential payroll side. And that is a method where the employees can go in there and be set to get paid based on certain situations. This is the way we typically set up any shift differential rules, any shift to pay differential rules, or any union mandated rules or stuff like that, where it's based on a certain task, a certain rate type they may be working, a certain time frame, day of the week, or shift that the employee may be working. And I'll show you some examples of that here on this call today as well. So in order to set up those task level rates and shift differential payrolls, the key thing here is we need you to contact the IT ePay team for assistance. Generally, you have access to go in and see the default shift and task and all that information, but you don't necessarily have access to go in there and set the rate on the particular task. Or you don't really have the access, or may not want to mess with the complexity of the shift differential rules that are set up in there. So to that, I ask you to go in there and be sure you contact either myself, Tiandra, Beth, or Jade, and one of us can assist you with the setup of these items. So one of the things I'll say before I go into more in depth of each of these, I will say that in both cases here, if you're not getting a 4.0 now and you're making any changes whatsoever to a pay rate in Blueforce itself, then pay close attention to these steps, because I guarantee that one of your scenarios will fall into one of these two, either task level rates or the shift differential payrolls. So first thing, the task level rates. And the task level rates are actually, like I said, set up at the job level, in which I can go in the system and pull up all the tasks that are available for the employee to punch in and out of at the job level. Now, just an insight for you, and once again, we can cover this in a separate webinar and in a lot more detail, but when you go in to actually set up the task level rate, these tasks that are available are actually pulling in from JD Edwards. We actually set up the job in JD Edwards. We tell the system, we tell JDE that this particular job has a certain task model that's supposed to be used, and the system in turn sends those task models and the corresponding tasks over into Blueforce, at which point Blueforce now allows the employee to now clock in at these different tasks. Now, if this is like I said, a side conversation, but if you notice that when employees are clocking in and out of your jobs, that there are just too many tasks, or, for example, tasks you may not be using, please let the IT ePay team know. Once again, myself, Tiandra, Jade, or Beth, and one of us can go in there and assist you with that cleanup as well. Typically, some of the task models may have, 5 tasks up to maybe 20 tasks, and we understand that you may not always use all 20 tasks. You may only need 2, so we can clean that up and really what's referred to as unassign those unneeded tasks. So this screenshot that I'm showing right here on my presentation slide is showing you what the task looked like behind a specific job. At the top of the screen, you have a specific job. On the right-hand side, you have the status of those tasks. So any of those that are in green right now are basically telling us that those are the tasks that are available at that particular job right now. So for example, line 1 is custodian. Custodian is in a green status. That means that custodian task is available for an employee to select if they're ever prompted for one of our time collection devices to actually punch in and out of. The one that's in red, the third line, is letting us know that porter other is not available for this particular job. So once again, we have some tasks that are available for your use as needed. Now, the way the task level rates work is we can actually say that, typically the custodian task that has a red arrow pointing to it is kind of the default task for all the employees to use. So they'll be coming to the job, they punch in, they punch out, like I mentioned earlier, and the system will automatically default their time, in most cases, to that particular custodian task. Now, if the employee were to, say, pick floor tech, or maybe we want them to be an elevator starter, or one of these other tasks that are listed on this particular job, we can actually, at that point, tag a different rate to that particular task. So like I said earlier, maybe the floor tech gets $2 more, or more specifically, gets a flat rate of $12 an hour. That's kind of that rate for that task. What we would do is in the system, we would actually go in and tell it what particular task we want to assign a certain rate to. So in this example, this is a screenshot of what the ePay team would actually be seeing when they do this. We actually will go in there, pull up the task, verify that's the task you want to assign to a specific regular rate. So in this example, the carpet tech rate is going to be set to a $10 rate. By default, the way the system is set up right now is the system will always show the pay rate for us as being blank. That means that the system is forced to go out and get the employee's normal pay rate. Now, in saying that, the reason this becomes beneficial is because if that employee or any employee at a certain job is known to get paid a flat amount or a flat rate for working a different task, then we can come in here and automatically adjust that accordingly. Now, the task level rates, as I mentioned, they're for the most part static rates. We're just basically telling the system that whenever anybody clocks into carpet tech, in this case, they get the flat rate of $10 an hour. Now, it can go both ways. It's not typically, I don't think it's frowned upon, but it's typically not the norm where maybe an employee gets paid $12 normally, but the task they're working is $10 rate. Typically, they want to keep them at a higher rate. I mean, that's kind of the norm here, but It does happen. We understand that sometimes they work other jobs that pay a little less. On the other side of the coin as well, we also have scenarios where employees may work jobs that they may already get paid $12 an hour, or say $10 an hour in this case, but then they work at Carpet Tech and they're still getting paid $10 an hour. Bottom line, if we go the task level rate, we're saying that, once again, anybody who clocks in at that job level, at that job to that task, is going to get this particular rate. Now, furthermore, we have an option of other that's available as well. Now, some of our employees are tagged with this cleaning other task as a default task. And typically that happens because the normal job position or quote-unquote task out of J.D. Edwards was not available over in Blueforce for this specific job. So therefore, part of that task model vetting out, kind of how it goes through and figures out what exactly task the employee should have, it decides that since he couldn't match it up appropriately, let's go ahead and put it to cleaning other. Now the reason I bring this up is because cleaning other is actually kind of a miscellaneous task that's out there on all the jobs, and you can actually use that to your benefit. If we have a scenario where everyone's getting paid minimum wage, but certain employees, when they get to this particular job, get paid a different rate, we could actually assign a task level rate for that employee. And in saying that, we could come in here to clean other, assign it a $12.50 pay rate, and then have the default shift and task at the employee level reflect that it's for cleaning other. So that way, whenever the employee just punches in, it automatically defaults to cleaning other. It automatically pays them correctly at $12.50 when you're working this particular job. So what I would recommend, and I'll say it again before we end this call, I would recommend that if you have any situation where is getting paid different rates at different jobs, please reach out to the ePay team, and one of us can assist you with this and get it set up correctly. That way, A, you don't have to worry about it come payroll time or on a daily review basis. But more importantly, system's taking care of the employee. The employee doesn't have to be worried about getting paid wrong. System is doing all the work for you. Now, the other side of the coin here is the shift differential payroll. And this is the one that I like personally. I mean, I think it's a little bit more fluid. It allows you to do a little bit more scenarios and kind of allows you to really pay based on, I guess, dollar amount increases or percentage increases. And what I mean to that is the task level rate, you're basically telling the system this is a flat rate for Carpet Tech is $12 an hour. Whereas a shift differential rule says if an employee works Carpet Tech, then pay them $2 more, or pay them 5% more, or stuff along that line. So I think it's a little more fluid because now you're not telling the system that everybody gets the same rate. Now it's based on the position, the task, the time of day. There's other factors that come into play when it comes to a pay differential or shift differential rule. Now this actually is set up at the job level as well, and you'll see here on the screenshot that there is a tab called Pay Differential. That Pay Differential tab is where you will be able to go in there and see all the pay differentials. Now everyone who is an editor, submitter, or approver, you already have access to this tab. But I caution you, and I'm going to stress again, I caution you to not try to go out here and venture out and try to set one of these up on your own. A couple of reasons why. The minute you go in there and set up one up, and if you set it up incorrectly, going from that point forward, that differential rule is in essence active. That means that any time it hits the time card and then in turn hits the timesheet, it's going to get applied with the shift differential rules that you applied. So I would say that before you go in there and attempt this on your own, reach out to the ePay team for some just guidance and assistance and make sure your questions are answered correctly, and then we can decide which is the best way to approach this. So the shift differential payrolls can be set up different ways. And I did some screenshots just of the initial process, and I'll go back into Blueforce momentarily so you can actually see what you can do, actually, what the steps are behind doing this. But first off, you can set up a payroll based on the tasks that the employee worked. So what that basically means is when any employee at this particular job works the 4-tech job, I'll say 4-tech task, then the rule kicks in. Otherwise, if they're clocked in as custodians, if they're clocked in as, elevator starters, window washers, engineers, you name it, this rule would not apply otherwise. So you've got the ability here to basically tell it what task the employee wants to actually work. So task is right here in the middle of the screen. Now, in saying that, the shift differential rules, there's these four screenshots are actually part of one rule. And I'll actually show you how complex this can get. But keep in mind that you can actually make multiple rules for the job. So I can have a rule when someone clocks in as a 4-tech. I can have a rule when someone clocks in as a custodian. I can have a different rule when someone clocks in as a engineer, and so forth. So each of those different rules will work independently of one another and actually apply the rate, the pay, increase, decrease, whatever it may be, as we tell it to, based on that scenario being met. Now the beauty of this system is you can also not overlap two different rules. So in other words, I can have a rule that says when someone clocks in as a 4-tech, pay them $2 more, and then do a separate rule that says when someone uses a 4-tech, pay them $5 more. It doesn't work that way. If those rules are too similar, the system is going to kick it back to you and say, wait, you need some more rules behind it, or you just can't do it. So by specific task work, you can also do it by, and that's the first one here, you can always do it by a specific rate type worked. So this particular example, if an employee clocks in as high time windows is the name of my rate type here, then we're going to treat that as overtime, and then other things are going to happen as part of this rule goes. So that's one way to look at it. If someone clocks in as a specific rate type, we like it, we do something with it, otherwise we ignore it. So an example, if it's regular time, we leave it alone, but if someone clocks in as AB time, for those that have AB time out there, you can use that as an example. We can say then do something else part of the rule. Or if someone clocks in as holiday worked, then do something else as part of the rule. So we can build this as complex as we want. It all depends on what your final outcome is to make sure that the employee gets paid correctly. We can also do it for a specific time range. What that basically says is if an employee punches in between this time range, then in my example, I say pay overtime. So if this employee is clocking in between 4 o'clock and 11 o'clock, then he gets paid the overtime rate. If he clocks in, let's say if he works from 8 a.m. to 12 noon, that's not in this range, therefore he gets paid regular time otherwise. And lastly, we have a specific day or of the week or shift. So we can tell the system only run these rules on Tuesday and Wednesday because that's the only day the rules applied. Or only run it on Saturday and Sunday. Or only run it Monday through Friday. Whatever the scenario may be, we can actually set up what day of the week. And then we have a specific shift that's available. I can say I only want to run it on the 5:30, that's probably a bad example, but the 5:30 to 6:30 shift. But nevertheless, we can go in there and tell the system what items we want to use. Now the shifts, just so you know from this screen, are coming from your default shifts. So keep in mind, if someone is assigned a shift of 5:30 to 6:30 in this case, then they get applied part of this rule because I told it I only want people assigned to that shift to get that particular rule. So there's a lot of different combinations and permutations, I guess you can say, that we can actually put together when creating a shift differential rule. And the reason I want to say it's a little complex, it's not so complex for us here at kind of from the ePay side of it because we've done it quite a bit. And that's why we ask you to kind of solicit us for some assistance with this before you even try to venture out on your own. But it's got a lot of flexibility in here because we have different types of rules from all over the country. West Coast does it from the differently from the East Coast. Unions operate differently there. It becomes very, very complex in the different ways we set up these rules. Now, let me clear my screen here and share with you some other little aspects of this. For example, this is kind of what the full view looks like. When I go in there to do the shift differential payrolls, and I go into the actual job record and pull up my differential, I have to call it, I have to name it something. So the system's always going to prompt me to actually put a name of a shift differential rule. It's going to be a unique name. So I can call it Rule 1, I can call it Overtime Rule, I can call it Shift 1 Rule, whatever it may be. I have to call it something. Now, the beauty of this is we can set up a rule, let it run, and if it doesn't work, we can always come in here and mark it as inactive by unchecking that particular box. That basically will just let the rules sit there, and we can always toggle it back on if we want to kick it off again later. Or turn it off, make some edits, turn it back on so it starts working again later. The bottom line, you have the ability of going here and tell the system any task, like I told you earlier, any rate type, specific time frame, day of the week, and shift. And all these have to have some type of setting assigned to them to be successful. So I'm going to just pause here 1 minute. I'm going to go back to my Blueforce screen that was in just a little while ago. And I am going to go in here and look at a test job for us, in which I'm just going to put together a quick rule so you can kind of see how really it's not really difficult. It's just a matter of being a little vigilant to what you're actually going there and doing. So I'm going to go to my main office. This is my main office job, and at the bottom of the screen I have a tab called Pay Differential. Well, that Pay Differential tab now allows me to go in here and select that tab, and I can go in here and see that there's already a shift differential rule sitting there. Now, like I mentioned earlier, you always have the ability to come back here and edit and or delete that pay differential rule. If it's not working, then we can always get rid of it. But typically the minute you set one up, it's already active and it's running from that point forward. So keep that in mind. Now, with the beauty of a shift differential rule, we already started a pay period already. So we're in the middle of a pay period, it's Tuesday. Let's say you have a new rule that just started back on Saturday, and you need to apply this to all your time in the system. The minute we go in and create a pay differential rule for you, we can actually go back to the timesheet view and reprocess your timesheets. There's an option on the very far right of the timesheet. It's called Reprocess Timesheets. That will actually tell the system to go out, pull in all the rules that were added, update my results, I guess, from my data in my timesheets, and you will actually see the rule applied back to the current pay period, beginning of the current pay period. So it'll save you some time and give you some flexibility in case you didn't quite get all the information down the first day you went live with that new rule. So kind of go in here, I'm just going to add a new row just so you can kind of see how easy this is. I'm going to call this shift 1, and actually I'm going to go back over here and put in caps. Then I have the ability here of saying what tasks I want this apply this for. Now I can say any task. If I want to say I want every task that's in the system to be applied to this, then I leave it any task. Or I can be a specific task where only, in this case, porters get applied, or just a supervisor gets applied, whatever it may be that I want. But I'm going to leave it any task here so you can kind of see the flexibility that we have going on. For rate type, I can go in here and pick any of the different rate types that are available for me. If I want this to be for AV pay, I can do that. If I want this to be only when someone pays jury duty, I can do that as well. Or maybe when someone gets paid overtime, other things have to occur. So this is the basic part of the criteria. I can say, I'm going to leave it any here for this example, but I can go and say only do this when an employee punches into a certain rate type, or more so a supervisor, editor, submitter, whatnot, changes that employee's rate type to a certain type here. Now the root of this really is in the middle of the page here. You see hours between. These three sections here, these three lines, the hours between, allow us to put different scenarios, if you will, to be in play. So where we see this a lot is some of the unions. Typically during the day when someone clocks in, let's say a 7 to 3 p.m. shift, they don't get a differential, they don't get any extra perk or anything because they work the day shift. But when they come in at, say, 1500, and let's say they work until say 2300, let's say 11, we can tell the system that by rule, because of a union here, the rule says that anybody who works that time frame gets an extra $1.25 an hour. So I go in here and just put in the extra $1.25 an hour. Or even better, I could say, you know what, it's not $1.25 an hour. It's actually, they're going to get 5% of their pay rate. So you notice here there's a little toggle that changes from dollars to percentages. So in any case, I can actually pick either one of those and put that in the system. Another scenario is maybe after 11 o'clock on this job, and if they work until, let's say, 7 o'clock in the morning, this is our third shift, they are actually going to get paid $3 an hour more. So I put in the 3 here, and I put in the dollar sign, make sure the dollar signs are showing there. And now the system says if anytime anybody from any task, so keep in mind the way this works, the system goes back and says, well, if any task clock in, and it doesn't matter what rate type they use, they're always going to get paid $1.25 extra when they work this particular time frame, or $3 extra per hour if they work this time frame. So you're basically building those scenarios as you will want them to reflect on the employee's timesheet. That way you don't have to do any rate changes later, because the system is actually going to do this for you. Now you have a third scenario down here that you can fill in if you need to. In my case, the time frame of 7 to 3, or 0700 to 1500, 1500 there, doesn't have any pay differential. So it doesn't make any sense, I guess you can say, for me to put that in their system, because it's not going to react to it anyways, because it's a 0 increase. So you have the option of putting a third line if need be. Lastly, I have the ability here now to go in there, and let me stress before I go on to the next section here, sorry. These time frames is basically employee working between that time frame. So if you call in somebody, let's say an example, you have a third shift employee that's called in to come in at 8 o'clock. Well, the way the system is going to work is if they punch in at 8 o'clock, which is 2000 on the actual military time, you will find that that 8 o'clock time frame falls for 3 hours as far as the first scenario works on my list here. So within this, they have 3 hours that would actually fall into that. And then they actually would still work till 7 a.m. So then they would actually get the 8 hours that are a part of this particular scenario. So in all, they get paid the 8 hours, the 8 hours plus 3, which is total 11 hours. However, what you will see in the timesheet view is the system will automatically split it out for you between 2 different rates. You'll see 3 hours in the system for custodian at $13 an hour. Say $13.25 an hour, or whatever it may be, depending on what the rate increase was. But we'll say you have 3 hours at one rate, then you'll have the other 8 hours showing the $3 increment per hour at a different line on the timesheet. So it keeps them segregated and splits all that out nicely for you automatically, so you don't have to go back and do that later. Lastly, you have to tell it what days of the week you want this rule to take in effect. So if this rule only were rules that would be applied on the weekend, then I come in here and check Saturday and Sunday and leave Monday through Friday blank. So the system knows that when someone punches in, if it's Saturday and it's 3 p.m., then the rule is active and running until Sunday midnight, and then it cuts off and then starts Monday is a no rule, because now Monday does not fall in this particular ruling. And lastly, you have these shifts at the very bottom of the screen, where you can now tell the system what shifts do you actually want affected. Do you want them all selected, or you just want a certain one, etc. So these shifts, and if for those that have had any conversations with me about shifts over the course of the last couple of years we've been on the ePay, I've always told you that these labels, this shift 1, these days, afternoon, nights, these are just labels in the system. They don't really mean much other than it's a label. So what you can actually do is, you may have a shift in there that might be valid. You may have a shift that's no longer valid. The bottom line, they're just labels in the system to allow you to group your employees another way. So if I have a shift 1 employee that works 7 to 3, I can go in there and make sure there's a shift that's called 7 to 3, or one that's just labeled shift 1, and assign your employee to that shift. That doesn't mean that that's what the shift that they're always going to work. That just means that that's their default shift, and that is what it's referenced to here as far as the selection criteria for a shift differential rule. And once you're done, you click on Save, and you're done with this particular setup for shift differential. I'm going to close this one. I'm not going to save this one. But once it's saved, you'll see it on the job record under the Pay Differential tab, just like you see here on this screen. So from there, that is a shift differential rule. I mean, that's just an option that that's available for you that you might want to have set up for those special scenarios so your employees no longer have to worry about not getting paid correctly, or more specifically, the editor, submitter, and approver don't have to worry about going back in there and making any changes to pay rates after the fact. And I kind of want to reference one last time, the employee default shift and task on the employer profile is where a lot of the stuff drives. So in a future webinar, down the road here in a couple of weeks, we'll go through this piece a little bit more in depth. But this default shift and task affect a lot. They affect your shift differential rules. They also affect your lunch rules. For those that are using the scheduling module, there's some reflection there of the default shift and task. So this is a very powerful tab that we have to make sure that everything is showing correctly, especially the task portion of it as needed, because we use a lot of allocation stuff as far as our general ledgers is concerned and stuff on that default task. Like I said, we'll use that form in a couple of weeks to actually address this on a formal webinar. So kind of to wrap up today, once again, I just want to say support-wise, I want to stress this over and over and over, but I want to make sure that everyone puts a help desk ticket. Everyone is actually calling the help desk line for any assistance from the ePay team. And we really just do this because we want to make sure that we're all involved in other projects as well, so once we're stepped away for a while, we may not be available for a day or so. We don't want any of your requests to be lost in an email box or sitting in a voicemail waiting for us to respond. So ePay tickets should go always through the help desk support line. Otherwise, you can always contact ePay support directly, which is mainly for after-hour support and clock issues only, but you can always contact them if need be. So kind of wrap up, I want to say thank you for joining us today. We're going to have this same webinar again on Thursdays for any other teammates that may have missed today's webinar. But we'll continue next week with the Mastering Blueforce series. Next week we have another powerful webinar as it relates to alerts, and alerts being one of those things that we can have the system let you know when someone's not at the job site. I'll leave you with that note and kind of let you think of how alerts may benefit you and give you more detail next week. But not only that, we can actually set up alerts for budgets and other cool little functions within Blueforce as we start trying to expand into other facets of the system. So until next week, or until Thursday, or again for most of you next week, we'll catch you again on our next webinar. Thanks again.